I'm Jane Laurie, I'm the Global Head of Corporate Affairs for KPMG, and I'm delighted to be joined today by David Bennigsen. David, you're the founder and CEO of Signal AI, pioneering the intersection of artificial intelligence and media intelligence. And you've been recognised by Forbes 30 Under 30, by Data IQ, and by Business Insider. So clearly you are very influential in this space, and I'm thrilled to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jane. Looking forward to the discussion.
So maybe, David, by way of context, just to explain CEO Outlook. So every year, KPMG conducts a study with 1,300 business leaders around the world, businesses of about $500 million or more, so pretty substantial. And with 10 years of data at our disposal, starting to see some really interesting trends in terms of literally what is in the mind of CEOs. And we've seen that over the last 10 years, so much volatility, which I'm sure you can comment on in a minute, but I would say almost punctuated with COVID in the middle. And now looking at all that geopolitical tension, economic sort of turbulence, I suppose. So I kind of wanted to start really from there, David, to say you've been a CEO for 10 years, which is great, 10 years of CEO Outlook, 10 years as a CEO. And I'd love to get your perspective on what have you seen over the last 10 years in terms of that volatility, the economy that's actually really shaping businesses today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you say, it's very apt that I founded Signal just over 10 years ago now, and you've been running the CEO survey and report for just over a decade as well. And we founded the business 10 years ago, seeing and observing that the world was becoming more complex, more volatile. The number of risks and issues that CEOs and global businesses were facing off against had never been more challenging. And building reputation and managing risk in these complex times had never been more difficult. When we founded the business, which I started in my parents' garage, of course, like all good AI companies should begin, I don't think we would have ever have predicted that the next 10 years we're going to have that many challenges and that many issues to navigate around. As you mentioned, we've had COVID, but also Brexit, US political upheaval, geopolitical strife and issues, macroeconomic challenges. And I think what that means for us as a business is we're providing a service that tries to bring more confidence, more clarity, more quantifiable data to businesses to see around those corners and be more predictive. More personally as a CEO, I think probably the biggest theme that has surfaced for me in this last decade is one of resilience. If you're going to navigate these challenging times and lead your company through these complex waters, you need to have personal resilience, you need to build cultural resilience, and ultimately you need operational resilience as well. And so that's been a big learning and a big theme for me in this last decade.
Well, really interesting, because you talk about resilience, you talk about people. I think one of the things for me coming out of CEO Outlook this year is that talent is so squarely at the center of what CEOs are thinking. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, well, actually maybe give you some other context from an AI perspective as well. CEOs are saying that they do not believe that they're going to reduce the workforce significantly. So 3/4 of CEOs say they won't reduce the workforce. However, they are saying that they don't believe they've got the right skills in AI. So what do you see as that gap between the people we currently have in businesses today versus the skills that we're going to need in the future?
Yeah, you touch upon a couple of very, very big and important themes right now. On the topic of sort of workplace displacement and whether AI is going to take large swathes of the workforce away, I think I would agree with the CEO results there. And even as a practitioner in AI, I would challenge that. I gave a talk about 5 years ago covering the topic, as I described it, of augmented intelligence. I believe that these technologies are not going to replace the workforce. They are going to supercharge and augment the workforce. But in order to take advantage of that opportunity and that augmentation, as you rightly point out, you need the right skills, you need the right capabilities in your workforce. And so I think there's a big and correct focus from organizations right now on how do we provide the right education, how do we upskill our workforce, how do we get them in the right mindset so that they can take that next step on this journey and take advantage of those opportunities. We often say to our clients that it's not the technology that is going to replace people's jobs, but it may be people who know how to use the technology that may replace your job. And so I think it is incumbent upon CEOs to really prepare their organizations within that context.
So I'm interested in thinking about talent more broadly, and just that interest, what's the average age of your current?
Probably mid to late 20s in our organization. So it's naturally a young workforce, but I think you told me recently at KPMG it's not dissimilar. So
Absolutely,
I think whether you're a large corporate business or you're a more earlier stage innovative technology startup, I think the challenges can often be consistent, and we're all grappling, which is something I know you looked at within the report as well, about what is this new working model? How do we navigate this new hybrid working environment? We're obviously starting to see CEOs make announcements about the return to work, and so I think that's going to be a very, very interesting topic to play out still.
So that's kind of where I was going to go, which is, when you think about the sort of future generation, future workforce, for sure they're going to need AI skills, but I think there is this piece about what is the employee value proposition, what is it the future employee is going to look for. You talk about one of them, which is flexible working, and as you say, a lot of CEOs are starting to talk about going back to the workplace full time. In fact, I think 83% of CEOs said that in the next 3 years, they anticipate full time back to work. But interestingly, we're also seeing a generational difference. So maybe the more sort of established CEO is expecting to go back full time, and the sort of up and coming CEO may be more flexible. So I'm interested, as a potentially younger CEO, what do you see as the future of the hybrid working?
I think it's fascinating. I think for technology businesses, certainly there is a strong leaning towards offering flexibility as a core part of your value proposition. Nonetheless, I actually think it's a secondary consideration. For me personally, and I think for many of my peers, the primary consideration is, can you create an environment where people feel motivated, where people feel driven to come to work, where they feel inspired about the work that they're doing? Do they feel they're making an impact in their work? The secondary consideration, which I think can then follow suit, is what's the best model to create that environment where people can be successful, and whether that's fully remote, whether that's hybrid, or whether that's fully co-located and in the office 5 days a week. I think that has to be a secondary consideration. And first, it's about what is that employee value proposition? What are those values and that environment that's going to drive the right sort of behaviors within our business?
So that's really interesting. And in CEO Outlook, we saw that employee value proposition was the second most priority from an operational point of view for CEOs. Well, I was quite surprised about that. But as a CEO in your own right, how much time would you say you spend on thinking about employee value proposition, and what do you think is going to be really critical for those successful businesses in that space in the future?
I think that's got to be a huge consideration for any CEO and leader. If you want to attract the best possible talent, you have to be very, very thoughtful and very considered about what that employee value proposition is. You and I are both very passionate about the topic, I know, around trust. How do you build trust within your workforce? And if you're not considered about building trust, and you're not working on creating that trust with your employee base and your other key stakeholder groups, then you're never going to have that workforce at the highest level of the talent, as motivated as it could possibly be. I also think the younger generation of employee wants to be in an environment where they feel that the organization is being innovative, where they have an opportunity to make an impact. And so I think you have to be really thoughtful about these different sort of themes if you're going to create the right environment and attract the best possible talent.
When we think about the younger generation, the other thing which comes out really strongly in CEO Outlook is just this trend of sustainability and ESG, and how critical that is going to be, not just for business, but for future employees. So I'm quite interested in this kind of intersection of AI and ESG. So from your position, David, what do you think is the role of AI in actually helping us solve some of those bigger sustainability or ESG issues that we face today?
Well, I think without doubt, as you rightly say, ESG has become an extremely important topic within the workplace for the future of employees at board levels. I think AI has a massive opportunity, particularly in terms of measurability. I think one of the big challenges that we've seen with ESG is, organizations may espouse to want to do good, to make certain commitments to ESG, but is there accountability in then tracking and measuring how they are performing against those commitments and against the strategy that they've outlined? And what AI has an opportunity to do is trawl the world's information and scan the world's data and provide more of an outside-in view for organizations of how they are performing. And often it's not just about the corporate entity. It could be about the supply chain. It could be about their third-party relationships. It could be about the workforce. Using that technology and using that data to actually shine a light on whether they are living up to those commitments and those values, I think is going to provide a much greater level of confidence and belief that these ESG principles are actually being born in action.
No, that's super helpful. And I think exactly as you say, the more data we have, you can see a world where we start to identify what's working. So if we're sort of looking at addressing climate change, what are the things that are actually working? And data is going to help us do that, just as it has in healthcare, I guess.
Yes. You know, in the last few years, there's been an interesting reversion because I think businesses felt a lot of pressure to comment or communicate on almost any ESG related issue or geopolitical issue that was taking place in the world. And I think in the last year or two, we've seen a little bit of a retrenchment against that. I think the other opportunity that AI provides is, again, providing data and insight on what are the right topics and issues for organizations to lean in on and speak about, whether they really have an opinion or a perspective that matters, versus just jumping on every last ESG or societal topic that rises above the parapet. And so I hope it will provide organizations with more of a sort of navigation map as to where they really want to lean in and where they actually are better placed to not do so.
Well, and again, that comes out of CEO Outlook, that CEOs are definitely, as you say, they're pulling back on commenting things that aren't material to the business, but they are stepping forward on things that actually really matter. And I think you're right, data can only help that. And actually some of the work that we've been doing, actually looking at that data, collecting that data and understanding what's really driving reputation is really critical, I think.
Well, it's fascinating when you start connecting different stakeholder data sets and you're able to look and traverse from, say, the media discourse through to what your employees are saying or what your customers are responding or replying to you. And actually sometimes the issues that are playing out in the public forum are not necessarily the issues that your other key stakeholders really care about. And so I think by having access to this data and using AI to turn that data into insight, you provide an opportunity for organizations to be much more considered and specific about where they're going to lean in, where they actually want to get involved in an issue or a topic, or where it's actually better for them not to.
And as you say, it's not just about media perspective. So you're bringing the data together, and as we've sort of worked on, how you actually look across multiple audiences, you get a much more rounded view of what the world is talking about, I think.
Certainly. Huge opportunity.
Absolutely right. And on trust, I think we should come back to that. We could talk for a long time on trust in AI.
Absolutely.
So I'll ask you a couple of other questions, then maybe we can come back to that. But given your expertise, clearly, David, is, well, as a CEO, but also in the space of AI, I thought we'd just move in to talk a little bit more about AI. So in the CEO Outlook, this year more than any, AI has been at the absolute forefront in CEOs' minds. But before I ask you questions on that, I just wanted to sort of distinguish between generative AI and discriminative AI. And I think in your tech talk, you described generative AI, which I like this, as the more bookish cousin of discriminative AI. So can you tell me a bit more about what's the difference?
If we take a step back, there are actually many different forms of AI, very different techniques, and generative AI is just one part of that ecosystem, part of that family. Broadly speaking, within machine learning, which is one important field within the artificial intelligence space, there are two different approaches. There is a discriminative AI approach where you can use machine learning models and train those models to be able to distinguish or discern or discriminate between what something is or what something isn't. And generative AI, which uses machine learning and trains it on large sets of data to then be able to reproduce, generate, summarize, synthesize new information. So discriminative AI is very good at fact-finding, discerning whether something is or isn't about a particular issue or topic, whereas generative AI is very, very good at summarizing, producing, creating new forms of information. And so at Signal, we think it is the combination of these two different technologies that can ultimately get you the best possible results. And I think when we're advising our clients, we're encouraging them to get educated, to understand these differences and these nuances so that you can apply the right technology within the right part of the workflow within your business.
So if you say this kind of combination of generative and discriminative AI is where it's supposed to, or it should be, in this race to embrace AI, 64% of CEOs are saying, regardless of the economic conditions, they are going to invest in AI. So AI is very much at the top of the investment priorities. Where are you seeing the greatest investment? Is it more in Gen AI? Is it in discriminative AI? Or is it in something in between? So what are you seeing?
I think first and foremost, there is this principle around education and around skills. We've talked a little bit about how important that is within the context of your workforce. But if you're not educated and you don't understand this broader field and this broader set of technologies, you're not going to be able to implement and adopt them effectively. I think secondly, we're encouraging our clients to be experimental, to innovate, to adopt, to try new things, to build teams that are actually focused on deploying these technologies. And then the third, which again links back to this topic around ethics and around trust and responsibility, is how do you have a set of principles and a framework and a set of guidelines to how you are going to employ this in a safe and responsible way. We obviously had that conversation not long ago about that intersection between being bold, being fast, and being responsible, and the tension that exists between those sort of three parameters. And the conversation was really, are they mutually exclusive? Can you build a strategy that incorporates all three?
Well, you kind of read my mind actually, David, because I was going to say, again, in the CEO Outlook, 61% of CEOs say that one thing holding them back is this notion of ethical, responsible AI.
Yes.
Now, as you say, we've got a framework, ethical framework, which I think is very helpful to provide that guidance. But in some respects, it comes back to your point on trust. How critical is it that CEOs, if you like, draw their own red lines, understand where they're prepared to go and where they're not prepared to go, recognizing that regulation is still in some respects kind of, trying to get ahead of AI. We've had the EU AI Act, but it's hard for regulation to keep up. So where do you think CEOs, where are they going to get their regulation from? Is it self-regulation? How do they set those parameters?
Well, I think there is this tension between being bold, being fast, and being responsible. And I think a CEO's job, particularly in the adoption of something as transformative as AI, is to figure out how to navigate that balancing act. And I think the first thing to say is that the responsible part of that sort of triumvirate, I think, is a huge opportunity for businesses. I think if you can implement AI but do that responsibly, actually you have an opportunity to build something very differentiated and very compelling for the market. I think the other key point to note is that you can oscillate between which part of that triumvirate you focus on at which part of the life cycle. So when you're in these early stages of experimentation, perhaps you want to move quickly and you want to be quite bold and ambitious. When you're starting to move through the maturity cycle of deploying technology, you really want to be thinking about that responsible framework and about that trust framework and the importance of that, particularly if you're going to deliver something that is client-facing or employee-facing.
That's really interesting, because I think sometimes people think that the kind of responsible part of AI is going to hold us back, but actually what you're saying, which I really like that, is it can be a differentiator.
Totally.
So set your own regulation and...
Totally. And I think we're going to see that play out. You mentioned the EU AI regulation. We're going to see that sort of regulatory landscape sort of differentiate by region and by country. But I think what is a huge opportunity for organizations to do is take that sort of regulatory first approach and be as compliant and as responsible as possible, and use that as a value driver and a differentiator with what they're building.
Fantastic. So I'm going to take you a slightly different direction. So we've been talking very much about looking back over the last 10 years and the insights and the data that we've got from CEO Outlook. But as we look ahead, what I'm really interested in is 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been asking questions on generative AI. We were talking about technology, but we weren't talking about Gen AI. So, crystal ball question, if you were to look forward to the next 10 years, what are the questions you think we should be asking now that we're not asking today of CEOs?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I think if we went back in time and had this conversation 10 years ago, we probably would be still talking about the digital transformation, about the move to internet-based businesses, retail moving into e-commerce. And the interesting thing today is we don't really differentiate from digital businesses or non-digital businesses. Almost every business has to be digital first, and if they're not, they're probably being left behind. And the internet has become so pervasive in everything we do, both our work lives and our personal lives, that we don't disambiguate or differentiate as to that. And I think that will be the same phenomena that we see with AI. I think it's unlikely that we will have companies like Signal called Signal AI in 10 years' time. AI will become so pervasive, so naturally part of every aspect of our lives that differentiating from a company that is or isn't powered by AI will seem almost nonsensical. I think the next wave, and potentially what we'll be talking about in 10 years' time, is that concept of augmented intelligence, where the technology has become so ingrained that it becomes a natural extension of our very person. And we're beginning to see that and experience that, with the role of the smartphone or the iPad, these sort of digital objects that are these natural extensions of our life and hold all of this knowledge, personal information about who we are and what we do. We can't think about our lives now, unfortunately, without those extensions. I believe AI is going to accelerate that phenomenon greatly, and almost every aspect of our lives will be augmented by these intelligent systems and engines. And I think that has a very profound set of questions that it will pose to employers, to education systems, to healthcare. So there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered, but there's a huge opportunity for growth, innovation and value creation through that as well.
Fantastic, Dave. And I think it's probably true to say that the rise of AI is probably going to be exponential, even compared to the internet and where we were 10 years ago. So David, thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you for your time, sharing your insights. And it would be really interesting if you'll come back in 10 years' time. It would be great to see, could we have predicted the future?
Well, absolutely. I think one thing's for certain, we won't have predicted it all. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, David.